Kendricks had always been a collector of rare and unusual items. Her passion for antiquities bordered on obsession, and she loved the thrill of finding a hidden gem among a pile of forgotten relics. So when she heard about the estate auction of the late Harold Griffin, a renowned photographer with a mysterious past, she knew she had to attend. The auction was held in a dusty old mansion, Griffin's home for decades until his untimely death. Rumors swirled around the town about the cause of his demise. Some said it was a heart attack. Others whispered of something far more sinister. Mara paid little attention to the gossip. She was there for one reason only: camera. Harold Griffin's camera was legendary. An old, bulky model from the early 20th century, it was said to have captured images of ghostly apparitions, strange lights, and unexplainable phenomena. Griffin himself had spoken of the camera as if it were a living thing, a companion on his eerie journeys into the unknown. The stories only fueled Mara's desire to possess it. When the camera finally came up for auction, Mara found herself in a bidding war with a man she had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a long coat that seemed out of place in the warm room, and his eyes never left the camera. There was something unsettling about him, but Mara was too focused to care. She won the auction after a fierce battle, her final bid draining her bank account but filling her with a sense of triumph. As she left the auction house with the camera in hand, the man approached her. His presence sent a chill down her spine. "You should have let it go," he said in a voice that was almost a whisper. "That camera brings nothing but death." Mara brushed him off, attributing his warning to sour grapes. She had what she came for, and nothing could ruin her excitement. But as she drove home, the man's words echoed in her mind, planting the first seeds of doubt. Mara wasted no time setting up the camera in her home studio. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, with intricate engravings and a polished wooden body. She marveled at its weight and the smoothness of its mechanisms, wondering how many stories it had captured in its long existence. Eager to test it out, she loaded it with film and aimed it at the window. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her living room. She clicked the shutter and felt a strange sensation, as if the air around her had thickened for just a moment. Shaking off the feeling, she developed the film in her dark room. As the image began to appear on the paper, Mara's heart skipped a beat. The photograph was perfect, the shadows and light playing off each other in a mesmerizing way. Something was wrong. In the corner of the photo, just barely visible, was a figure. It was dark, almost a silhouette, and it seemed to be standing outside the window, staring in. Mara frowned, convinced it was a trick of the light. She had been alone in the house, and her studio was on the second floor. There was no way anyone could have been outside the window. She put the photo aside and told herself it was nothing. The unease lingered. That night, Mara had trouble sleeping. Her dreams were filled with unsettling images. A dark figure, just like the one in the photo, standing at the foot of her bed, watching her with hollow eyes. She woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing. Clock on her nightstand read 3:33 a.m. Mara tried to dismiss the dream, but it haunted her the next day. She decided to take more photos with the camera, hoping to dispel her fears by proving that the first image had been a fluke. She took pictures around her house, in the garden, and even down by the old cemetery at the edge of town. But every time she developed the photos, the figure was there, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always watching. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Mara began researching the camera's history. She spent hours in the library, combing through old newspapers and archives. What she found was disturbing. The camera had been made in 1902 by a man named Victor Ainsley, brilliant but troubled inventor. Ainsley was obsessed with the idea of capturing the human soul on film. He believed that his camera, equipped with special lenses and crafted with occult symbols, could photograph not just the physical world, but the spiritual one as well. His experiments took a dark turn when he began photographing dying patients in hospital, hoping to capture their souls at the moment of death. Ainsley became increasingly unhinged, convinced that he had succeeded in his mission. But the photographs were disturbing. Blurry, shadowy figures that seemed to cling to the bodies of the dead. Ainsley's obsession eventually led to his downfall. He was found dead in his workshop, the camera beside him, a look of terror frozen on his face. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but those who saw his body whispered that it looked as though he had been frightened to death. The camera disappeared shortly after Ainsley's death, resurfacing years later in the hands of Harold Griffin. Griffin, too, had become obsessed with the camera, using it to document his investigations into the paranormal. But like Ainsley, Griffin met a tragic end. Mara felt a cold dread settle over her. As she read the accounts, the camera was cursed. Everyone who had owned it had either died or gone mad. She thought of the man at the auction, his warning now ringing loudly in her ears. But it was too late. He had already taken too many pictures. Mara's life began to unravel. The figure in the photos grew more distinct with each picture she took. It was no longer a shadowy silhouette, but a clear, menacing presence. A man with hollow eyes, dressed in tattered clothes, his face twisted into a malevolent grin. He appeared not just in photos but in Mara's home. She would catch glimpses of him out of the corner of her eye, standing in doorways or lurking in the shadows. At night, she heard whispers and felt the weight of his gaze on her as she lay in bed. Too terrified to move, sleep-deprived and paranoid, Mara became a recluse. She stopped leaving the house, afraid of what she might see if she ventured outside. Her friends and family tried to reach out, but she pushed them away, fearing that the curse might spread to them. The man in the photos began to speak to her. His voice was a low, guttural whisper that filled her mind, telling her to take more pictures, capture more souls. He promised her power, immortality, if she would just obey. But Mara knew it was a lie. She had seen what had happened to Ainsley and Griffin. The camera consumed its owners, feeding on their fear and despair until there was nothing left. Desperate to rid herself of the curse, Mara tried to destroy the camera. She smashed it with a hammer, set it on fire, and even buried it in the woods. But every time, it reappeared in her home, pristine and untouched. The man in the photos laughed at her feeble attempts, his voice growing louder, more insistent. Mara knew she couldn't go on like that. The camera had to be stopped, but she had no idea how. In her desperation, she returned to the auction house, hoping to find the man who had warned her. But the auctioneer claimed to have no memory of such a person. It was as if he had never existed. With no other options, Mara decided to confront the curse head-on. She set up the camera in her dark room, aimed it at herself, and prepared to take the final photograph. The camera wanted her soul. She would give it willingly, but on her terms. As she stood before the camera, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The whispers in her mind grew fainter, and the man's presence seemed to fade. She clicked the shutter, and for a moment, everything went dark. When Mara opened her eyes, she was standing in the photograph. The world around her was black and white, and the edges of reality seemed to blur and distort. The man was there too, standing just behind her, his eyes gleaming with triumph. But Mara was no longer afraid. She had one last trick up her sleeve. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small mirror, holding it up to the man. His grin faltered as he saw his reflection. The mirror, like the camera, was an old relic, something Mara had picked up years ago from a curious little shop. She had never known its true purpose until now. The man recoiled, his form flickering and distorting. The mirror reflected not just his image but his essence, trapping him in the glass. He screamed, a sound that shook the very fabric of the photograph. And then he was gone, his presence erased from both the photo and Mara's mind. Mara found herself back in her dark room, the camera still in front of her. She felt weak, drained, but alive. The whispers were gone and the man was no longer in the photos. She had won, but at a great cost. The camera, now inert and lifeless, sat on the table like a discarded toy. It no longer held any power over her. Mara knew she could never use it again.